Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back into some more bite-sized business advice. And today's episode is a topic that, for me, kind of seems common sense, but at the same time, I feel like it's just lacking in the world. We're talking about building a compassionate business. We're going to bring human beings back into running our businesses. I have an amazing guest lined up today who's going to break this down, and we're going to figure out what's missing, what's wrong, why is this not happening, and also how you can incorporate this into your business to be more profitable and more successful. Dr. Bruno Cignacco, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invite. I feel very honored to be here. Thank you.
So this is a big topic, right? Like, we have 15 minutes. I don't know if we can, how far into this we're going to get,
yes.
but building a more compassionate business. First of all, before we talk about what's missing, what's wrong, and how to do this, define that for me, because I think in our own minds we can spin that word to mean a lot of different things. But for you, what is a compassionate business?
Very interesting. Compassion means when you relate to others is understanding how they think, how they feel. This means cognitive level, emotional level, and also try to help them when possible. Especially compassion is applied when people face difficulties. There is a very interesting study of a doctor that was about to operate a patient, and the researchers were researching on this type of situation, and they observed that when the doctor, before the patient is about to be operated, took 1 minute to this patient, and this operation could be life or death outcomes. When they took 1 minute to this patient needed less anesthesia during the operation, and they recover very quickly, as compared with the patient that didn't have this compassionate conversation before the operation. This means that being compassionate doesn't take a lot of time. Can take 1 minute conversation. This means understanding how others feel. If they feel distress, try to soothe them, try to support them, try to give them some advice whenever possible. Try to provide them with some, for example, technical advice or information or contact or some training, for example, in the case of the workplace.
That's really interesting, because the first thing I thought of when you were talking about the doctor was, when you have a conversation with someone, you're so much less likely to be rude or disrespectful. And then you also look at the social media that is of today, and people are just tearing each other apart on the internet in the comment section because you're not having that conversation. I assume it doesn't matter, but is there a difference between in-person physical conversations, virtual like this, and the difference between that and absolutely no contact and it's just the comments?
Yes, of course. If you have the choice, for example, in the workplace, I advise companies that they should have in-person conversation, especially when you are communicating bad news. For example, an employee to be dismissed, for example, because the company is downgraded or downsizing. Well, in this case, the company shouldn't send an email to fire the employee. This will be disrespectful. On the contrary, they will have a one-to-one meeting, and if possible, in this difficult situation, the company, I observe company that when they're firing employees, they don't leave this employee on their own. They try to refer to the competing organization so that the employee can get a job in the competing company. So they're being compassionate even when the employee faces a difficult situation like being fired. So in-person conversation is better. Why? Because you get body language, you can have the connection on an energetic level. You can see how they feel, how they think. You can interact. Instead, other type of conversation, for example, conversation that are sequential, like an email, and even Zoom. Zoom is good, but it's not the same as in person. Why? Because many people, there are a lot of studies on Zoom, and what they observe that people tend to focus too much on the screen, and they try to be too focused, and this affects the creative skills. People tend to be not so creative when talking to others on Zoom instead of talking to others in person. Why? Because they have to focus so much their eyesight on the screen. So whenever possible, in-person conversation will be good, but also when you're giving good news, when you're, for example, telling this employee about their performance, that they have very good performance, that they exceeded the objective. Well, this will be good to not only, for example, write down a personalized thank you letter, hand signed, but also convoke this employee to your office and also explain them in person and also even give a pat on their back so that they can feel that they count. Because many companies focus only on the economic aspects, but most stakeholders have other needs. They don't have only economic needs, they have emotional needs, need to be recognized, need to be appreciated. They have mental needs, need to be stimulated. For example, employees, in many cases, they get bored, they get demotivated. They need to be stimulated, new projects, new endeavors, and they have social needs too. So this means that most companies focus only on the economic needs, and they believe that the most important aspect in business could be new technology, artificial intelligence, more information, more contacts, and the most important aspect in business is the human being. It's a meta resource. It's a resource that generates other resources. The human being generates business models, generate new technology, new products, innovative services, new business models. So if we care for the human being, all the other resources take care of their on their own. But if you don't care for the human being, that is the most important resource, well, the company is more likely to fail. Why so important? Because no company can succeed without the help of customers, the head of employees, the head of suppliers, because the company is interdependent. So this means that when we build strong, long-lasting relationship with these stakeholders, this economic result, such as market share, for example, profitability, productivity, tend to be going up on their own, even in an effortless manner.
Yeah, this is such a great conversation, and like I said, it does seem common sense, but then when you go into the marketplace and you don't see this a whole lot. I mean, you see people, employees that are disengaged. I'm thinking if you just go to, we're here in the States. I know you're in the UK, but if you go into a Lowe's or a Home Depot and you see people that are just there to collect a paycheck, I don't see this very prominently and well displayed in most companies, which brings me to the question of why. Like, what
Why?
is
Why?
getting in the way? If this is so common sense, we know that we need to be compassionate and deal with other human beings. It's the only way to succeed. Why is this not taking place?
Lack of awareness is one of the obstacles, and lack of information. Lack of awareness means that companies believe that they can succeed on their own. They don't understand the concept of interdependence, that they have to get all stakeholders on their side. You cannot force customer to be on your side. You cannot force employee to be on your side or supplier to be on your side. But you can build a strong, long-lasting relationship with them, and they will come to your side on their own, effortlessly, willingly. This is one important aspect. The other aspect is that companies don't know so much about research on compassionate business and this aspect. There is an interesting paper that observed that companies that build a compassionate workplace where employees support one another, these companies tend to have higher employee satisfaction, higher customer satisfaction. Why? Because employees that are happy tend to serve customers more effectively. Lower absenteeism, lower turnover, lower stress levels, and this impact positively on the bottom line. So this means that being compassionate, forming this relationship, developing a long-lasting relationship with stakeholders within the company and outside the company, bring about tangible economic results. Instead, when you focus only on economic results, in many cases you tend to achieve this result by all means. For example, many companies that focus only on profit, they exploit employees, they pollute the environment, they deceive customers, they cheat on suppliers. Why? Because they're focused only on economic results. They don't care about stakeholders. But there should be an equilibrium between what I call the quantitative aspect of business, what can be measured, what can be counted, such as profit, market share, and the qualitative aspect of business, what cannot be measured precisely, such as compassion, empathy, generosity, gratitude, camaraderie, commitment, and others. So there should be a balance between these two aspects.
So outside of the focus shift of looking just at numbers and profit and revenue and moving to the human being, all of them, stakeholders, customers, employees included, what needs to change? Because once you have to obviously have the awareness, like you said, there's a
Yes,
lack of awareness. So once you have the awareness, how can you go about and incorporate this into an organization? Because the bigger
yes.
the organization, obviously the harder it gets. But what would be the first step?
Two main points. Two main points. First off, reduce the amount of busyness. Most companies are very busy. I saw a company, for example, employees work 8 hours a day. They have 8 meetings a day. How you can have time to be compassionate with your colleagues? How you can have time to be compassionate with customer if you're always busy? In some cases, busy on things that are not relevant. So reducing business, and also a very important aspect when I advise companies on this topic, I observe that many companies have a lot of fear in the workplace. Fear, for example, employees are fearful of making mistakes, fearful of being fired, fearful of sharing resources, fearful of trying something new. These are what we call workplaces that are not psychologically safe. In this case, this company is tend to be less productive. The workplace tend to be not based on trust. Why? People don't trust each other. They don't share resources. This is more costly. Why? Because in many cases they have everything in writing with contracts and so on, so that people keep their word. And this is not an environment where you can develop compassionate bonds with others. Why? Because when you are fearful, you tend to adopt a survival mode, like a freeze, fight, fly mode, and you cannot connect to others. You try to defend yourself from the threat. Instead, when you uh, when you detect this pool, these pockets of fear within the workplace and try to brush them away, people are more prone to be compassionate. Why? Because they are not defensive. They are not stressed. When you are fearful, you are stressed. How you can be compassionate with others? You try to defend from the threat. You try to protect yourself. So eliminate the fear is fundamental. And most companies have a bit of fear or a lot of fear in their workplaces. And this is not contributing for employees to be productive, because when you are fearful, you cannot be innovative or productive. Why? Because your discerning skills are temporarily impaired. Why? Because you are focusing on the threat. So eliminating fear is very important, because people by default will feel much more at ease to connect to others. But also I see companies that are acting in the right way, and what they do is, for example, once a week, employees meet after work, for example, to have some drinks, to have a meal, to chat, to know each other on a personal and emotional level. They don't talk about work. And what happened? These type of meetings are very good, because when employees go back to work, they feel revitalized. They feel refreshed. They know their colleagues not only because of their roles. Everyone is equal at that meeting, and they can connect on a different level. They know on a much more human level instead of on a role level.
Yeah, so one of the things that just popped in my head while you were describing that was a lot of companies, when we're talking about metrics and fear in particular, they're holding people accountable to metrics, to KPIs, for example, key performance indicators. And one of the things that drives employee behavior is that number. So whatever that number is incentivizing them to act in a certain way. And
Mm-hmm.
what comes from that as a side effect is they compromise things like being compassionate, both to their coworkers, their suppliers, vendors, the other shareholders in the business. So really, I think we need to take a step back and say, how do you define and design KPIs so that they build a more compassionate workplace and don't instill fear that people are then driving to just run away from?
Very interesting point. And let's talk about a specific case. Let's imagine, for example, that the company have some key performance indicator for sales force, for example, for the sales team, and they have to achieve a specific amount of sale per month. So if you focus only on the amount of sales, these employees might try to get this number, this figure, by all means. In some cases, forcing customer to buy product that they don't want. And this is counterproductive. Why? Because when customers discover that have bought a product that they don't want, you don't expect this customer to leave positive reviews. You won't expect this customer to recommend your product to other customers. So when you are forceful and you are only driven by key performance indicator, what we call the quantitative aspect of business, you are very prone to achieve this or trying to achieve this key performance indicator, leaving aside the qualitative aspect. What is the opposite approach? I give you an example of a company well known that is called Zappos, that sell products online like shoes and so on. In this case, a customer office, the one that are serving customer service officers, what they do, they connect on an emotional and mental level to customer. There is a case that customer service officer was talking to a customer for many hours until they solved the problem. You don't see many call centers talking to customer for many hours because they want to get rid of customer as soon as possible. They have a quota of how many customers they have to talk every hour, and this is quantitative aspect. This is not focusing on relationship. I will advise the listener to focus, if you have a business, to focus on, instead of focusing on selling attitude, adopt a serving attitude. Try to add value to customer, not only to customer, but in this case, we're talking about customer and other stakeholders. Try to serve them. Try to advise them, to support them. In some cases, giving advice implies that you are referring them to the competing company because you cannot serve them well. In some cases, implies that you're selling the cheapest product, the one that give you the smaller commission, but doesn't matter. You want to build a strong relationship with customer. And serving customer doesn't mean servitude. This means that you are adding value. You are trying to improve their lives. You care for their well-being. You are trying to do the best for them. Because many customers run away from companies that are self-centered, that they want only to consider this customer as a figure in the database. This means, oh, this customer is not a human being. It's a figure that will contribute to sales. And customers, when they feel dehumanized, they run away from this company because they are real flesh and bone human beings with economic needs, social needs, mental needs, and emotional needs.
It's so interesting because, your employees are humans, your customers are humans, you're human. I think if you're listening to this, I can't confirm that, but I know the other two are true. And it's so hard because we can measure KPIs, we can measure sales and profit. We can't measure emotions, and we can't measure our connection, our level of connection with somebody else. And it's why
But
this is so important.
a famous thought leader observed, not everything that counts can be counted, and
Yeah.
not everything that can be counted counts. This attribute to Einstein, but obviously it was another thought leader that observed this. But this is so true because compassion, camaraderie, empathy cannot be measured, but you might measure the effects. Why? Because when you treat people in a compassionate way, they are less stressed, and this reduces medical costs. People being less stressed, less absenteeism, and less turnover. These are clear costs that you are reducing indirectly. Indirectly.
I like that. Yeah. So think about it in like a chain, right? What can you
Yes,
do in terms of this conversation that will affect everything else? Retention, medical costs, profit, revenue, customer
exactly.
satisfaction. Fascinating conversation. Dr. Bruno, thank you for being here. Where can the listener go find more about you and your book?
They can find, they can check my website, www.brunocignacco.com, and they can find me on LinkedIn. And the book, The Art of Compassionate Business, in its second edition, can be found online, Amazon, or any other bookshop, or offline worldwide.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This is a conversation that I was excited to have, and I'm excited that the world gets to hear, and I think we need more of. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
For those of you watching, listening, wherever you are, the website's down there. It's on the screen. It's in the show notes down below. Go grab a copy of the book. And more than anything else, just try this out. If you don't have this as part of your culture, if you're not running a compassionate organization, trust me, I've been on both sides, the good and the bad. And it's way better to run a compassionate organization that cares about people rather than putting profits first. So thanks to Dr. Bruno. Go check him out and make sure you subscribe. We want to see you back tomorrow on the next episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Thanks for being here.